Yowzer! You know, folks, there's gonna be those flights when everything just doesn't go according to plan. Stand by. Let me get us safely back on the ground. Whew. Well, welcome back to the Epic Flight Academy commercial pilot course. Remember our 3 keys to success. And please hit that subscribe button. Our topic today is abnormal and emergency operation checklists. To help us with this topic, we'll be referencing the Epic Flight Academy Cessna 172S normal and emergency checklist. So let's begin with the use of the checklist. So here's a scenario where you have just departed the airport, you're 400 feet in the air, just passing over the departure end of the runway when you're suddenly met with silence. And at the same time, your engine oil spraying out across the side of your aircraft, and you see it trailing down the side window. Uh-oh. So here is response number 1. Oh, darn it, where the heck is that checklist again? Oh, here it is. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, let me flip to that section. Let me flip to the section on emergencies. Clearly, this is not the correct response. Okay, response number 2. Oh, I don't remember that doggone checklist for this, but I'm going to pitch for airspeed and just fly her straight ahead. At least you've kept the aircraft under control and remembered to fly the airplane first. And now, response number 3. Whoa, total power loss. Okay, flaps are up, so airspeed 70. Fly the airplane, pick my landing spot. There we go, mixture, cut off. Fuel shutoff valve off, mags off. Flaps full. Fly the airplane while the flaps are coming into position. There they are, full down. Standby battery off, master switch off. Cabin doors unlatched, short final, and land. The reason I walked you through those 3 responses to this scenario was to demonstrate the proper use of the emergency checklist. Response number 3 is, of course, the response we're looking for. Notice, each of the items that I called out and performed was bordered by a dashed line on the checklist. You can see that here. I want you to notice the dashed lines around the items. This dashed line means that these items are what we call immediate action items and should be committed to ROTE memory. The reason for this is so that I can fly the airplane first while doing these items from ROTE memory. Response number 1 is an entirely improper use of the checklist. In an emergency, I don't want to be fumbling around for that checklist. Response number 2 is also an improper use of the checklist in that I ignored it altogether because I did not have my immediate action items memorized. So the proper use of an emergency checklist is to have the immediate action items committed to ROTE memory and then, time permitting, review any remaining items on the checklist. That's why it's handy to keep this checklist in the side pocket, to reach for it after you have completed any memory items. And we're not done yet. In situations where time allows, continually reevaluate the situation as you progress toward a safe outcome for the flight. Address or readdress new items or changes to the situation as necessary. This is the last E in the decide model, and you can see that model here. Continually evaluate the situation and circle back to the first D for detect and move through the model again and again as needed to guide the flight to a safe outcome. So, what about oil pressure drop? Emergency? Low oil pressure all by itself is an abnormality, and it may or may not become an emergency. Hey, wait a minute. Is there a difference between an abnormality and an emergency? Yes, and here it is. An abnormality is simply something out of the ordinary, non-routine. As an abnormality, it may or may not be serious, and it could possibly develop into something serious. So, do not take it lightly. Monitor it, do not ignore it, and remember your decide model. Notice that in your Epic Flight Academy C-172S checklist, there is a section called Abnormal Procedures. The Abnormal Procedures checklist have a blue header. The Normal Procedure checklists have a black header. The Emergency Procedure checklists are printed on a yellow background, have a red header, and immediate action items are bordered by a black dashed line. Now, back to that low oil pressure. If the low oil pressure annunciator comes on, let's look in the abnormality section for low oil pressure. Check the oil pressure indicator on the MFD to confirm the indication. Now, look at the oil temperature. If it remains normal, it is possible that the oil pressure sending unit or the relief valve is malfunctioning. But don't get complacent. Continue to monitor both oil temperature and pressure as the flight continues. If a total loss of oil pressure and a rise in oil temperature occur at the same time, it is very likely that the engine is about to fail. So reduce power and plan accordingly. Let's take a look at an issue known as a hot mag. A hot mag? Is that like a hot potato? Or maybe a hot chili pepper? No. As you probably know, a magneto has two coils that interact to allow it to create enough current to generate a spark at the spark plug. You can see the primary and secondary coils in this schematic. Primary is shown in red, and a secondary is shown in yellow. Closing the ignition switch grounds the primary coil, and this disables the magneto. In other words, closing the ignition switch turns the magneto off. Turning the ignition on opens this circuit and ungrounds the primary coil, and the mag is hot. Hot means it could create a spark if the magneto is rotated. Now, that small wire or lead running from the primary coil to the ignition switch and to ground is the primary lead, or we call it the P lead for short. You can see the P lead labeled here. If the P lead is broken, the primary coil is ungrounded, and that's right, the mag is hot. If the magneto is rotated while hot, it could possibly fire. This is a potential danger that we must be aware of around propellers, and why we do a magneto ground check as part of a normal shutdown. So, Mike, is a failed magneto different from a hot mag, and how do I know the difference? Yes, they're different. We know that a hot mag is ungrounded. Now, this could be by intention, by turning the ignition switch on, or by accident if the P lead is broken. A failed mag is one that was operating normally and no longer is. This could show up as a rough running mag or as a completely failed mag. The pilot can test for a rough running mag by turning one magneto off at a time. Hey, can I do this in flight? Well, sure. You do it during the run-up at 1800 RPM. So in flight, simply power back a little, maybe to the bottom of the green arc on the RPM indicator, and do the same mag check that you do during run-up. An obvious power loss on one magneto is most likely from fouled spark plugs. To remedy this, lean the mixture to the recommended lean cruise for flight. If the problem does not clear up in a few minutes, determine if a richer mixture will produce smoother operation. If not, proceed to the nearest airport for repairs using the both position on the magnetos, unless extreme roughness makes the use of a single magneto necessary. Now, here's a situation that'll get your attention. Fire in the cabin or fire in the cockpit. Sometimes it may be easy to see what's burning and what caused the fire. Many times it may be impossible to see what's burning, let alone what caused it. In these instances, a cockpit fire, it's very possible that it is an electrical fire. On board your aircraft, you have an extinguisher that is effective on Class A fires, normal combustibles, Class B fires, flammable liquids, and Class C fires, electrical equipment. That extinguisher is clamped to the floor between the two front seats. Here is what it looks like. This is halon 1211, also known as bromochlorodifluoromethane. Okay, 3 times real fast. Okay, anyway, halon 1211 is very effective in fire suppression. Its residues are generally non-toxic. However, it can cause coughing, dizziness, headache, dyspnea. That's labored breathing or shortness of breath. So after we use it in the cabin, ventilate. Now let's have a look at our cabin fire emergency checklist. This checklist has immediate action items that are required to be committed to rote memory. Standby battery, off. Master switch, off. Vents, cabin air, cabin heat, closed, and fire extinguisher, activate. Notice the remainder of this checklist is not enclosed in a dashed line and is all about ventilating the cabin after extinguisher activation. Remember, 1211 is not something you want to inhale if at all possible, even though it is said to be non-toxic. Now, speaking of ventilation, if you had to do this in an actual situation, at what speed could you open the cabin windows on the Cessna 172S? I'll give you a minute to look that up. You'll find that here in section 2 on limitations in the airspeed limitations table. The maximum window open speed is the same as VNE. So if it was me in an actual situation, I think I'd open the cabin windows to help ventilate. Now, before we leave this topic, here's one thing I want you to do. Do this both with and without your CFI in the actual airplane while it's shut down, say as part of a pre-flight inspection. Practice handling the fire extinguisher in the cabin. Notice you won't be able to reach between the seats to access it. Practice removing the extinguisher by reaching behind the seat while holding the yoke with one hand and remembering to fly the airplane first. Okay, another scenario. Let's go ahead and head out and go flying. We go through our checklists. We're ready to start the engine, and we experience a fire during the start. Uh-oh, what's my procedure? This checklist has some immediate action items that must be memorized, but it's interesting in that it is in 2 parts. Why is that? Well, because the first thing that you're going to do is to continue to crank the starter, turning the engine over. Now, we do this in an attempt to literally suck the fire into the engine. Notice, this is your first memorized immediate action item. Starter, continue cranking. Now, one of 2 things is going to happen. Number 1, the engine starts. Number 2, the engine does not start. If the engine starts, then we can get out the checklist and we can see that our procedure is to run the RPM up to 1800 and run the engine for a few minutes and then complete a normal shutdown. If the engine does not start, again, we're in a position where we can't be reaching for or fumbling for the checklist. We must have these next items memorized. Now, with your left hand still on the ignition key, holding the switch in the start position, throttle full open. This means push it all the way forward. Mixture idle cutoff. This means pull it all the way out. Press the center knob with your thumb. Fuel shutoff valve off. Put your fingers in this hook motion and reach down to the fuel shutoff and pull it out. Aux fuel pump off. Notice my hand crossing over while I'm still holding that starter switch. Okay, practice this. Fuel aux pump off. Magnetos off. Now, when you do this motion in the Cessna 172S, Because of the design of the switch, when you turn the magnetos off, you are turning the starter motor off as well. Then, standby battery off, master switch off. Now, that concludes the immediate action items or memory items. So now I can return to the checklist and read the rest of the items. Okay, grab the fire extinguisher using the technique that we discussed earlier, set the parking brake, exit the airplane, and use the extinguisher as needed to fight the fire. Now let's address an autopilot malfunction. Concerning autopilot or electric trim failure, please see our commercial pilot video on YouTube by going to the commercial pilot course, Autopilot. Dive in around 6 minutes and 30 seconds for the autopilot failure. Immediate action items on your checklist are: grasp the control wheel firmly.
Firmly grasp it.
Number 2, the autopilot disconnect button with my finger, press and hold. Remember, you must hold the disconnect button in at this point. Number 3, pull the autopilot circuit breaker out. Then you can release that autopilot disconnect, trim the airplane, and fly normally. Remember, do not re-engage the autopilot for the remainder of the flight. Well, folks, that covers some of the abnormalities and emergencies that we might encounter in the Cessna 172S, but we have by no means covered all of the various checklists. So please be sure to review all the checklists for your airplane. Remember, normal procedure checklists have a black header. The abnormal procedure checklists have a blue header. The emergency procedure checklists have a red header. And most importantly, the use of the checklist properly by a professional pilot, they will have their immediate action items memorized. Well, folks, that's a wrap for today. We'll see you next time.